The Atelier d'Or Fashion Week Gala, held in the shimmering glass and steel Pantheon Tower, was a zenith of the city's style elite. 1,000 champagne flutes clinked, reflecting the runway's dazzling lights. Each year, the gala culminated in the Golden Thimble Award, a coveted design competition. This year, it boasted a new initiative, Threads of Tomorrow, meant to discover talent from all walks of life. Presiding over the event was Madame Vivienne DuBois, the grande dame of haute couture. Her name was synonymous with inaccessible luxury and an impeccable, albeit icy, aesthetic. Vivienne, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and a diamond brooch that outshone the spotlights, spoke in a voice that commanded attention, honed by decades of dictating trends. She was a woman who believed style was inherent, a birthright, not something earned in a back alley. Among the carefully curated crowd, a stark contrast emerged. Lyra Vance, 24, stood near a serving station, assisting her Aunt Sophia, who catered these lavish events to make ends meet for their small family. Lyra's hands, usually busy with needles and fabric, clasped a tray of delicate canapes. Her simple yet elegant, self-made dress was the only hint of her true passion. Lyra lived in the crowded, vibrant textile district known as the Weave, where the hum of old sewing machines was a perpetual soundtrack. She was here because her Aunt Sophia, having secretly submitted Lyra's designs, had secured her a coveted Threads of Tomorrow spot. Lyra, though hesitant, saw a glimmer of hope for her family's struggling fabric shop, Lyra's Loom, threatened by rising rents. Vivienne DuBois, ever the keen observer of social dynamics, spotted Lyra's competition badge. A mischievous glint entered her eyes. The Threads of Tomorrow had received an unexpected amount of media attention, and Vivienne saw an opportunity to demonstrate the true hierarchy of design. "Ah, the Threads of Tomorrow indeed," Vivienne announced, her voice carrying through the hall, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "I see we have one of our diverse participants helping with the refreshments. Come, child, how about you show us how you design in the workshops, or rather, the garages of the lower city?" A ripple of discreet laughter spread among the guests. Celebrity stylists, fashion magnates, and their equally well-dressed entourages. Mr. Julian Thorne, owner of the city's largest chain of luxury boutiques, whispered to his wife, "I bet our designs barely hold together. Probably never touched silk that wasn't scarfed from a bargain bin." Lyra's Aunt Sophia, serving champagne nearby, gripped her tray, her knuckles white. 20 years catering to these people, enduring their condescension, raising Lyra after her parents' accident, and now her niece was to be a spectacle. The injustice burned. "Sophia, dear, you may step away from your duties for a moment," Vivienne commanded with false magnanimity. "I want you to witness your niece's talent. It will be quite educational for both of you." Lyra, however, remained rooted, her gaze not just on Vivienne, but sweeping across every face in the room. Her dark eyes, usually reflecting the patterns of her fabric, now registered the contempt, the amusement, and a stark understanding of the world she had dared to enter at 24. She had learned that true artistry spoke louder than any pronouncements of privilege. And at that moment, what she saw was a collection of powerful individuals who had no idea the quiet force they were underestimating. There was something in Lyra's stillness, a calm resolve, that made some of the guests' laughter falter. Her fingers, unconsciously tracing patterns on her own dress, seemed to visualize designs on an invisible loom. "Of course, Madame DuBois," Lyra replied, her voice soft but steady. "It would be my pleasure." Vivienne settled back into her plush armchair, a queen preparing to watch her jester. "Excellent. I trust you've never worked with such exquisite materials before, have you?" She gestured toward a display of shimmering silk and rare lace, each piece worth more than, well, Mrs. Eleanor Albright, a fashion blogger with a surgically enhanced smile, piped up, "Vivienne, isn't this a little much? The poor girl is going to be humiliated." "Nonsense," Vivienne retorted, adjusting her diamond earrings. "It's an opportunity. She'll tell her friend she's styled in a real design studio." What Madame Vivienne DuBois didn't know, and was about to learn in the most public and embarrassing way, was that Lyra Vance had spent the last 8 years immersed in every aspect of fabric, pattern, and form. While her peers pursued fleeting trends, Lyra delved into the history of textiles, the geometry of tailoring, and the psychology of color. Her schoolmates might have been glued to screens. Lyra devoured books on sartorial history from the public library and meticulously studied vintage patterns on the old, mended sewing machine in her family shop. In the silent hours before dawn, when Aunt Sophia worked her double shifts, Lyra analyzed the works of great couturiers, from ancient Japanese kimonos to modern architectural gowns. She understood fabric like a second skin, knew how each thread would drape, how light would play on different weaves. But most importantly, Vivienne had no idea she was about to be humiliated by the very girl she had underestimated out of pure, unadulterated snobbery in front of all her powerful peers. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just be a design defeat. It would be a lesson Vivienne would carry with her for the rest of her life. Vivienne, still reveling in her presumed superiority, directed Lyra to a display of opulent fabrics. "Today, Miss Vance, you will create a simple accessory. A scarf, perhaps, or a clutch, something to demonstrate your basic understanding of aesthetics." Her tone implied Lyra would be lucky to sew a straight seam. And to make it interesting, you must incorporate all of these materials. She swept a hand over a collection of disparate, challenging fabrics, a heavily beaded brocade, a delicate, almost sheer organza, a stiff metallic lame, and a piece of raw, unprocessed linen. The combination was designed to be impossible, clashing textures and weights that no true designer would ever pair. Lyra nodded silently, her gaze unwavering. She approached the materials with precision that made Julian Thorne, who had initially scoffed, raise an eyebrow. Each fabric was touched, analyzed, its weight and drape assessed, as if that opulent display were just one of the hundreds of material challenges she had overcome. "Let's make this truly interesting," Vivienne announced to the guests, savoring her control. "If the girl manages to produce something remotely wearable, I'll donate 5,000 credits to, I don't know, some vocational school in the weave." Polished laughter rippled through the room again. But this time, Lyra looked up and smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Aunt Sophia, watching from the corner, felt a chill. She knew that smile. It was the same one Lyra had worn as a child, meticulously piecing together scrap fabrics into doll clothes that defied their humble origins. The same smile she had worn at 16 when she declared she could fix the old shop's industrial sewing machine, which no one else could touch. Vivienne, delighted, chose a large, ornate golden needle and thread. "Perhaps you prefer to use this, dear? It's what real designers use." Her voice dripped with condescension, implying Lyra was used to crude tools. Lyra responded instantly, gently declining the needle and selecting a fine, sharp one from the standard toolkit, alongside a neutral, strong thread. An awkward silence filled the room. That wasn't the move of someone who barely knew how to sew. It was a choice of someone who understood precision and the delicate dance between needle and fabric. "Interesting," murmured Mrs. Albright, leaning forward, her phone poised for a discreet recording. Vivienne hesitated for a few seconds, long enough for Lyra to realize that the grande dame might know luxury, but not the practicalities of true design. Vivienne's instruction probably came from her head designers, not her own hands. Lyra's fingers moved, a silent dance of calculation. While Vivienne thought about her next pronouncement, Lyra allowed herself a brief mental journey back in time. 8 years earlier, when she was only 16, she had found a discarded, pattern-filled fashion journal in a public library bin, a true treasure. She had taken it home, hidden in her worn backpack, and asked Aunt Sophia to show her the basic stitches. "Me Estrella, why do you want to learn that?" her aunt had asked, exhausted after another double shift catering. "To create beauty, Annie. To show them that even we can make something wonderful." At that time, Aunt Sophia earned barely enough to cover rent and food. There was no money for art classes, for new fabric, for anything beyond necessities. But there was the Weaves Public Library, which became Lyra's second home, offering dusty books on historical fashion, fabric manuals, and inspiration no one else seemed to touch. Every day after school, she walked the 3 kilometers, fueled by a hunger not just for knowledge, but for a world she yearned to shape. Vivienne finally broke the silence. "Well, Miss Vance, what will it be? A napkin, perhaps? Something simple." Her tone was dismissive. Lyra, however, already had a plan. She began to work with the fabrics, not in a haphazard way expected, but with a deliberate, almost surgical approach. Each piece of fabric was studied, cut, and manipulated with an ease that belied its difficulty. She wasn't creating a scarf or a clutch. She was building. "Our little seamstress is rushing," Vivienne commented to the guests, trying to regain her conversational authority. "In real design, you take your time." It was then that Lyra made her first psychological move. She paused, pretended to think deeply for 15 seconds, then deftly folded a segment of the raw linen, creating a complex pleat that seamlessly integrated with a piece of metallic lame. It was a move that a beginner would never consider, but it was actually part of a complex, strategic plan that would take 10 more steps to reveal itself. "Ah, you see." Vivienne turned triumphantly to the guests. She lacked patience. Typical. But Julian Thorne, who had grown up in a family textile business 40 years ago and recognized true craftsmanship, frowned. "Vivienne, this girl is constructing a cantilevered drape." "A what?" she replied, annoyed at being interrupted during her demonstration of superiority. "It's a foundational technique, rarely seen executed so precisely without a pattern. Quite sophisticated." Vivienne looked at the nascent form with new tension in her shoulders. Nonsense. She must have seen it in a cheap pattern book. But as Lyra's hands continued their work, something unsettling began to take shape. Lyra wasn't just responding to the challenge. She was dictating the narrative of the creation. Every stitch she made, every fold she pressed, occupied exactly the right place, creating a harmony that transformed the disparate fabrics into something resembling a visual symphony. Aunt Sophia watched from the corner, her heart racing. She knew Lyra was talented, but she had never seen her work under such intense, prejudiced scrutiny. And for the first time in 20 years of working in these mansions, she saw a flicker of genuine apprehension in Vivienne DuBois's eyes. The fear of discovering that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as utterly unique as she had always believed. Each new dismissive comment Vivienne tried to impose only fed something inside Lyra that the designer couldn't see. A silent strength, being fortified by the very injustice she was trying to inflict. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was signing Vivienne's own fashion obituary, stitched into the very garment Lyra was creating, which would soon become the stage for one of the greatest humiliations in the social history of the city's elite. Lyra's tenth critical manipulation of the fabric revealed something that made Julian Thorne gasp, almost choking on his expensive whiskey. The girl had incorporated the delicate organza into the structure, creating a flowing, ethereal cascade that contrasted stunningly with the stiff brocade. It was a seemingly impossible feat, but any experienced textile artist would recognize the deadly skill and foresight involved. "Vivienne," Thorne whispered urgently, "this girl is no amateur. She's a master tension and drape." But Vivienne was too determined to prove her superiority to listen to warnings. "Relax, dear. She must have memorized a few techniques from a video. I'll be done with this demonstration in 5 minutes." That's when Lyra did something unexpected. She calmly rose from her workstation and walked over to Aunt Sophia, who was watching everything from the corner of the room, her hands clasped tightly. "Auntie," Lyra said in a low voice that echoed through the tense silence of the room, "remember when you said one day I would show these people who we really are, what our family shop truly stands for?" Aunt Sophia nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She remembered perfectly. It was the day Lyra turned 16 and their family shop faced foreclosure. Lyra had found her aunt crying in their small apartment above the shop and promised her that one day she would change everything, make their legacy one of pride. "That girl has more integrity than all of us put together," Mrs. Albright murmured to her husband, watching the interaction between niece and aunt. Vivienne tapped her fingers impatiently on the pristine white table. "Can we continue the charade? I have other commitments tonight." Lyra returned to her workstation, but something had fundamentally shifted in her demeanor. She was no longer the shy young woman invited for entertainment. She was an artist who carried years of sacrifice, secret studies, and a determination forged in adversity on her shoulders. Lyra's 11th step was executed with surgical precision that made Vivienne frown for the first time. She had created a double illusion, a structural element that appeared to defy gravity, yet simultaneously revealed the exquisite detail of the beaded brocade. If Vivienne focused on the structure, she'd miss the intricate surface. If she focused on the surface, she'd fail to understand the underlying engineering. That's not possible," Vivienne muttered, studying creation intently for the first time since the challenge began. That's when Thorne realized something crucial. "Vivienne, you're being out-designed by a girl who's probably never set foot in a formal fashion school in her life." While Vivienne tried to find flaw, Lyra took the opportunity to observe every face in the room. Mrs. Albright had stopped scrolling on her phone and was leaning forward, fascinated. The luxury boutique owner had put his phone aside. Even Thorne's wife, who had been leafing through a glossy magazine, was now paying full attention to the unfolding drama. Aunt Sophia knew that look on Lyra's face. It was the same one she had at 12 when she discovered an old pattern book in a thrift store. The same look she had for 5 hours straight, dissecting garments to understand their construction on their slow, mended sewing machine. The same look that made her wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to sketch designs before going to school. Vivienne finally made a comment, a desperate attempt to pick apart the design, but it was too late. Lyra had anticipated that possibility 10 steps ago. "Finished," Lyra said simply, presenting her creation, a sculptural, wearable art piece that seamlessly blended all the impossible fabrics into a cohesive, elegant statement. It was a wrist cuff, a bracelet of impossible beauty, symbolizing resilience. The silence in the room was deafening. Vivienne looked at the cuff, then at Lyra, then back at cuff. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from a contained rage at the realization that she was being systematically outmaneuvered by someone she considered inferior. "You must have seen that construction somewhere," she said, her voice higher than normal. "No one learns it on their own." Lyra smiled for the first time since the challenge began. "You're right, ma'am. I learned it from the Forgotten Masters." "The Forgotten Masters?" Thorne asked incredulously. Lyra nodded. "Not personally, no. But I studied all their documented works. Thousands of designs from every era and culture. This particular technique, a variable cantilever with hidden tension points, was used by a collective of weavers in the ancient city of Xylos, circa 800 BC, to create ceremonial headpieces. Vivienne looked around the room, searching the faces of the guests for support. But what she found was something she had never seen directed at her: silent disapproval. For the first time in her life, the people around her were not impressed by her performance. Aunt Sophia stepped forward, her voice, usually gentle, now firm and clear. "My niece woke up every day at 5 in the morning to sketch designs before school. She walked 3 kilometers to the public library because we couldn't afford internet. When I worked double shifts, she stayed up all night practicing stitches by lamplight because our electricity was sometimes cut off. She learned fabric not from expensive schools, but from a deep love and respect for craft." The room was completely silent now. Lyra looked at her aunt with a mixture of love and determination that made some of those present look away, ashamed. "The fabric of dreams," Lyra said softly, presenting the cuff, its lines elegant, its message powerful. Vivienne stared at the piece for a long moment, as if expecting the threads to unravel on their own. When she finally looked up, she found Lyra watching her with the same unruffled calm with which she had begun the challenge. But now something had completely changed in the dynamics of the room. The guests no longer looked at Lyra as entertainment. They looked at her as someone who had just rewritten all their assumptions about talent, class, and merit. And they looked at Vivienne with a mixture of embarrassment and disappointment she had never experienced before. What Vivienne DuBois didn't know yet was that this defeat on the stage would be only the first stitch in a much larger design that was about to begin. A design where all the social rules she had always taken for granted would be questioned, and where the girl she had underestimated would prove that true style has nothing to do with labels or bank accounts. Vivienne stared at the cuff for 15 seconds that seemed like an eternity. Her trembling fingers touched the intricate design, as if they could magically undo its flawless execution. The silence in the room was so thick, you could hear the distant murmur of the city below. That was luck," she muttered, her voice trembling, all previous confidence gone. She must have memorized that specific technique somewhere. Thorne rose from his seat and walked over to the display. "Vivienne, that girl just executed a structural design that even I, with 40 years in textiles, didn't know it was possible for these materials. Mrs. Albright discreetly pulled out her phone and began recording. As an experienced blogger, she immediately recognized the viral potential of this moment. A prejudiced fashion icon being humiliated by a prodigy she had underestimated. "I don't accept that," said Vivienne, standing up abruptly and knocking over a champagne flute. "Something's wrong here. No one learns to design like that on their own. Someone trained her specifically to humiliate me." Lyra remained seated, watching her with the same unruffled calm. "Would you like another challenge, madam? I can design with any materials here, or all of them at once, if you prefer." The comment caused a nervous murmur among the guests. It was an offer that sounded impossible, but after what they had just witnessed, no one dared to doubt her. "You're being arrogant now," Vivienne retorted, her face red with anger and humiliation. "A girl from the Weave doesn't talk to her superiors like that." That's when Aunt Sophia stepped forward, and for the first time in 20 years looked Vivienne DuBois directly in the eye without lowering her head. "Madame DuBois," Aunt Sophia said, her voice firm and clear, "my niece is not from the Weave in the way you mean it. We are from a community of creators, and she is not being arrogant. She is being honest about her abilities. Something you clearly cannot do about yours." The tension in the room rose exponentially. Some guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing they were witnessing something much bigger than a simple design challenge. Vivienne turned to Aunt Sophia with fury. "How dare you speak to me that way? Have you forgotten your place in this establishment?" "No," Aunt Sophia replied calmly. "I remembered our worth." Julian Thorne intervened, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "Vivienne, perhaps we should acknowledge that the young woman is truly talented. Exceptionally talented." Vivienne laughed bitterly. "Don't you understand? This was orchestrated. Someone trained her specifically to make me look like an idiot in my own hall." Lyra finally stood up, and when she spoke, her voice carried maturity that silenced all the adults present. "Madame DuBois, do you want to know the truth? I wasn't trained to humiliate you. I spent the last 8 years studying design because I dreamed of creating beauty that respected the craft. People who understood that talent has no social class, no last name, no predetermined address." She paused, looking at each person present. "When you invited me to show you how we design in the garages, I thought I would finally have a chance to show that my passion deserved respect. But now I realize that you never wanted a fair display. You want a show of humiliation." Mrs. Albright had stopped recording and watched the scene with fascination. "How old are you, kid?" 24, Lyra replied. "And how long have you been designing seriously?" 8 years. Albright looked at Vivienne with an expression that mixed disbelief and sharp disapproval. "Vivienne, you've just been out-designed by a self-taught young woman. A young woman whose family you employ. A young woman you invited to be a joke." Vivienne felt the crushing weight of every gaze in the room, and for the first time in her life, they were not looks of admiration or envy. They were looks of judgment. I didn't know she designed seriously." She tried to defend herself, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "The question isn't whether she designed seriously," Thorne said, clearly irritated. "The question is that you invited her to create, assuming she would be easily outmatched. Why? Because she's the caterer's niece. Because she's from the Weave. Because she doesn't have money or a prestigious name. The silence that followed was devastating. Lyra calmly picked up her tools and placed them neatly in her small kit, each movement executed with precision. "Thank you for the platform, Madame DuBois. It was educational." When she finished, she turned to her aunt. "Annie, can we go? We have early orders for the shop tomorrow." Aunt Sophia nodded, removing the apron she had worn to serve the guests. But before leaving, she turned to Vivienne one last time. "Madame DuBois, thank you for showing me that my niece deserves to be in much better places than this." As aunt and niece walked toward the door, Mrs. Albright called out, "Lyra, are you interested in a design apprenticeship? I know some ateliers who would love to have someone with your talent." Lyra stopped and smiled, her first genuine smile of the night. "Very interested, ma'am." Albright handed her a card. "Call me on Monday." Vivienne watched motionless, still processing how she had lost complete control of the situation. In less than an hour, she had gone from respected hostess to the woman who had underestimated a prodigy out of prejudice in front of important witnesses. When the door closed behind Lyra and Aunt Sophia, the remaining guests looked at each other in awkward silence. Julian Thorne was the first to stand up. "I think I had better leave, too." One by one, the guests began to leave, offering only cold farewells and disapproving glances. Vivienne was left alone in the glittering hall, still staring at the empty workstation, where her arrogance had been systematically unstitched by a young woman she considered beneath her. But what she didn't know was that tonight would be just the first cut in a much bigger pattern. One where Lyra Vance would rewrite not only her own history, but question the entire system of privilege that people like Vivienne DuBois took for granted. As Lyra walked home with her aunt under the city's neon glow, she carried in her pocket the card that would change her life forever. And in her mind, she was already calculating not just new designs, but new possibilities in a much bigger tapestry. The tapestry of proving that true nobility cannot be bought with money, but is earned with character. 6 months later, Lyra Vance walked through grand halls of the prestigious Imperial Institute of Fashion with a full scholarship to study advanced textile design. Mrs. Albright had kept her promise, connecting Lyra not only with academic opportunities, but with a whole world of designers, manufacturers, and patrons who recognize talent regardless of social background. The video of that night at the Atelier d'Art Gala had gone viral. Millions of views in weeks. Not because someone had discreetly recorded the challenge, but because Mrs. Albright herself had shared the full, unedited story on her popular social media channels, turning Lyra into a symbol of overcoming adversity and Vivienne into a cautionary tale of what not to do when you possess privilege. "Prodigy from the Weave Out Designs Prejudiced Icon" was a headline that circulated across every digital platform. The comments were relentless. "Shame on that woman, and this girl deserves every opportunity," dominated the response sections. Madame Vivienne DuBois had become persona non grata in her own exclusive social circles. The Imperial Design Council revoked her honorary membership after pressure from other esteemed designers. 3 high-profile charities removed her name from their boards. Even Julian Thorne, her business associate of decades, began to politely avoid her at industry events. Vivienne has always been dismissive, but I never imagined she could be so cruel, Thorne's wife commented during a charity luncheon in the Riviera. To humiliate a child like that in front of everyone. The worst part for Vivienne was realizing that Lyra had never sought revenge or exposure. She had simply designed something she did naturally with a mastery developed through years of quiet dedication. The humiliation Vivienne felt was entirely self-inflicted, a direct result of her own prejudiced assumptions. Aunt Sophia had been promoted to catering manager at a 5-star hotel chain, a job that paid 3 times as much and came with full benefits. It wasn't charity. It was recognition of professionalism and dedication she had always demonstrated, now finally valued by employers who saw beyond prejudice. Lyra, with a grant secured through the Imperial Institute, founded Threads of Hope, a free online design program that connected young people from underserved communities with mentors from the fashion industry. In less than 6 months, hundreds of young aspiring designers were learning not just how to sketch and sew, but life strategies that no formal classroom could teach: resilience, innovation, and the power of cultural identity. Design taught me that every material, every individual, has unique strategic value. Lyra explained during an interview with the Global Style Network. Madame DuBois taught me that some people need to lose everything to learn what truly matters. When asked if she held a grudge against the woman who tried to humiliate her, Lyra smiled with the same calm she had shown on that fateful night. Grudges are like tangled threads. They only get in the way of creating something beautiful. I prefer to focus on what I can build. Vivienne watched that interview alone in her opulent penthouse, now echoing with the absence of the friends who had abandoned her. For the first time, she truly understood what she had lost that night. Not just a design challenge, but the opportunity to be a better person, to connect with true artistry. Thorne called once after the incident, his voice clipped. "Vivienne, you created that situation." Lyra just responded with a grace you should have shown from the beginning. The lesson echoed beyond the gilded halls of the Pantheon Tower. Lyra proved that true nobility does not come from surnames or bank accounts, but from character forged in adversity and demonstrated through action. She turned prejudice into purpose, the humiliation inflicted by others into her own extraordinary growth. Today, when Lyra looks to the future, she sees no limitations imposed by others, but possibilities woven by her own determination. Vivienne had tried to diminish her to make herself feel bigger, but she ended up revealing that true greatness is measured by the ability to lift others up, not tear them down. Aunt Sophia proudly framed a photo of Lyra receiving her first academic honorable mention at the Imperial Institute. On the wall next to it, a certificate from the Threads of Hope program, which had already impacted thousands of young lives across the globe. These were achievements that no money could buy and no prejudice could steal. The best revenge, as Lyra discovered, is not to destroy those who try to diminish you. It is to build something so extraordinary that their mediocrity becomes irrelevant by comparison. Vivienne DuBois tried to make Lyra Vance entertainment, but Lyra Vance became inspiration. And that difference defines not only who wins on a runway, but who truly wins in life. Years passed. Lyra Vance's name became a beacon in the global fashion industry. Her designs, celebrated for their innovative spirit and profound storytelling, graced runways from Paris to Tokyo. Her brand, Lyra's Loom, wasn't just about clothes. It was a movement, a celebration of heritage, craftsmanship, and the belief that beauty can be found in every thread of life. The small family fabric shop in the Weave transformed into a bustling atelier and flagship store, still retaining its soulful charm and serving as the heart of Lyra's empire. Aunt Sophia, now a respected business partner, oversaw its operations with fierce pride. Lady Seraphina Sterling, Vivienne DuBois Sorry, consistent with the outline, now Vivienne DuBois, lived a quiet, solitary life, her name a distant whisper in the annals of fashion history, often cited as an example of hubris. She occasionally saw Lyra's face on news feeds, a radiant symbol of success and purpose, and understood, with a dull ache, the true cost of her arrogance. Lyra's triumph wasn't just hers. It was a victory for every underestimated dream, every unacknowledged talent. She didn't just design garments. She designed a future, proving that true power does not lie in having privileges, but in turning obstacles into opportunities for extraordinary growth, creating a legacy woven from the most resilient threads of the human spirit.